Hello and welcome to CIMA's Roundtable, Managing Responsible Business, the Future of Ethics. I'm Nicola Marr, the editor of The Accountant, an international publication covering the accounting profession, and I'll be chairing today's event. Ethics is now as important to the health of a business as the financials, and in the wake of the financial crisis, investors and other stakeholders are calling for more non-financial information to tell the complete story of an organisation. Leading management accounting designation CGMA has conducted a global survey on business ethics, and in this debate we will be looking at some of the most important findings. In this segment we'll look at how economic pressures affect reporting, the current ethical procedures in place and efforts to mitigate risk. Less than half of respondents to the CGMA survey said their organisations have a violation hotline and/or an ethical helpline set up. Tanya, what can be done to increase these numbers? Should these kinds of measures be mandated?
I'm not sure if they should be mandated, and again, when we reflect on them, the good news is they have increased. There are more hotlines in place, so that's risen about 10% globally. What's more of an issue is how they're used. So I think there's been other research out there which shows that a lot of people don't even know if they're in existence, or they might be aware that there is a hotline in their organisation, but how to use them and how they're followed up on is a mystery, which I think goes back to the point from our first segment, is actually how are ethics embedded? How is that turned from the top following up? What action is going to be taken? Because if hotlines exist, if there's architecture there, but you're unsure on how it's used, how you will be taken seriously and what action will be taken, well, is it worth having it there in the first place? Really forward-thinking companies will act on this. This is something that will help them understand what risks are at place in the organisation and also take a kind of temperature of where the organisation is at. So perhaps if you're getting no calls at all, maybe you need to worry, but if you're getting certain ones from certain areas around the world, act on it. Again, on a positive light, when you speak to hotline providers, and there are a few that do operate globally, CIMA also provide a support line for its members around the world 24/7 through such a hotline. There is increasing interest from markets outside of Europe, outside of the States, in using this. Why? Because they're operating in a global marketplace and they want to understand how they are working internally and what are the problems and hot points within their organisations. That's showing real leadership in a company. You want to know what is working in your organisation and what isn't. But most of all, you need to address it.
Yeah. I guess one of the other things that I wanted to look at is actually incentivising elements of an employee's role. Nina, do you think this could actually help to promote ethical behaviour?
I'm not sure. I think my answer is a bit ambivalent. Part of the issue around ethics is that there are a vast number of people who really want to do the right thing. So the incentivisation isn't really necessary for that category of person. They really want to do the right thing. They've seen something they're uncomfortable with and they would like to fix it. I think, picking up on Tanya's point, they may not know how to fix it. In terms of incentivising, I think there is a different approach, perhaps. Incentivising to make sure that that communication message goes out, that people know from the tone at the top, really picking up Brian's point and Simon's point, tone at the top, the incentivisation maybe should be at that level to say, you must pass these messages out. You must explain to people that there is a culture of no retaliation, that we would encourage you to take advantage of these tools, to notify people that they exist. So that, yes, I really would incentivise. But I think there's a concern that if you say to people, if you get 16 ethics cases lodged this week, you'll get a bonus, it's terribly inappropriate, because an ethics case should be a true ethics case. I think the other thing that we didn't quite cover is, when you are thinking about incentivisation, you must consider the people who are making the reports, who are using the helplines. They want to know that their details are held confidential, that the privacy has been observed, that their approach and their effort to raise a query has been handled appropriately. So if you incentivised, what you might find then is that balance of feeling that they can lodge a query and it will get handled sensitively may be then skewed if you make it a financial benefit to lodge a query. And I think there is a real concern that you mustn't overstep that mark.
Jeff, what do you think?
I think that incentivization is very tough for any organisation. I think that the key thing for any organisation is to ensure that its management structure, managers know how to manage, and managing includes managing ethics and ethical issues as they come up. The normal route of any concerns that people should have is through their management chain. It's only when that management chain breaks down that you need to have a hotline or something else. And the focus on hotlines, I mean, I was once in an organisation where the hotline was unobtainable, which I think meant that, and I think they did it on purpose, it meant that you had to go through your management route. It wasn't the first course of action to take on the hotline.
In terms of actually economical pressures, you know, having a negative effect on ethical behaviour and compliance, which is, you know, known, is this actually more evident in emerging economies? And what do you think, and how do you think that this could be tackled?
I think there are huge economic pressures in every economy at the moment, and I think it's the linking of different economies around the world which are making us see those pressures in place. So there are economies where certain ethical considerations are not even considered anyway. I mean, the home of ipaid-a-bribe.com is India, where actually you can go onto a website and say, I didn't pay a bribe, and that's actually quite an abnormal activity. British companies coming up against that type of competition in countries like that are facing real pressure. I was at a fundraising event the other day when a businessman, a very successful businessman said to me in a conversation about bribery, I think everyone should be allowed to bribe. Because he saw that the level playing field in this time of economic pressure, the only way it could be done is not to penalise British-type companies who used to say, well, if we don't do it, the French will, who are now saying if we don't do it, the Chinese, the Brazilians, the Indians and others will. It's a real pressure. That doesn't mean he's right, but it means that the pressure has been enormous. And those emerging economies, I'm not saying that they have not different pressures because they're developing, they're coming from a very low level of economic capability to a much higher level very, very fast, and their first considerations are economics and numbers rather than quality and ethics, and that's a real issue.
The pressures in a downturn, economic downturn, to cut corners are very high for people to make numbers because that's how their career is going to be seen and so on. But that has to be resisted, and it, as you said, we've said the tone from the top has to say we will back you if you stick by our ethical standards and what you do, even though that means we're going to lose business. Just can I say something about this question of hotlines? Americans call them hotlines. In Europe we don't. We've, thank goodness, given up whistleblowing lines, which is saying something after an event. So what we have now is speak-up lines. It's a means for people to raise issues if they can't do it through their line managers because it will be inappropriate, and they need assurance that that will be confidential and protected. And more companies are valuing these lines, either internally or to an external provider, because it's telling them what's happening in their organisation. And we have lots of examples of things that would have been very, very bad for the reputation of an organisation being snuffed out early because somebody has had the courage to speak up on that. They're a very important element in any applied economic program and applied ethics program.
Do you think more people would be inclined to actually use speak-up lines than perhaps, you know, going down another route just because they would feel a bit more, you know, at ease, I guess, that no one else was going to find out about what they were?
I think it depends on how close they are to the situation.
Yeah.
If it's somebody that they work very close with, a colleague that you've worked with many years or have developed a very good relationship, you might feel hesitant to report on that person, and so you might want to do something more confidential. If it's something that you hear through the grapevine that you're not really certain about, you might discuss with others first and say, oh, are you experiencing the same problem with somebody else? Or you speak to your line manager and go, and if you have a good relationship with that individual, saying, I've seen this happen, I'm not sure what to do, and consult with others before really escalating the issue.
Yeah.
And certainly be ensured that you've got evidence on something that is going wrong. I mean, unfortunately, running the hotline at CIMA, AICPA also have a hotline for its own members. I mean, a hotline, more of a kind of a coaching line for people to deal with issues. Predominantly, those ethical pressures are probably coming from your management. So it's been quite open. You know that the word being challenging, you need to be able to have that confidence to push back and question, and then be able to document whatever the issue is. And if you can't get around, then you're going to have to find another senior executive or go up to an audit committee or the board, and if you feel you're blocked or it's very uncomfortable to go down any of those routes, that's when you might look at the hotline. But we would expect our members to have the confidence. Yeah, absolutely, it's talking it with colleagues, it's finding out, you'll then find more evidence of other people feeling the same. And what I would always suggest is have those discussions with your wider team, and that's it's not necessarily safety in numbers, but you will find that more people come together, and when you've got a joint voice to speak up against ethical issues, it's stronger and you can take action.
I think just from an internal perspective, that's helpful. There is the other comment, though, that you need to be careful if you are spreading information around a wider team that is unsubstantiated, then you yourself are very much part of that exposure. And certainly in issues where we've dealt with fraud or bribery and facilitation payments with governments in other countries, you will want to minimise that spread to avoid any litigation or disclosure risk. So what you'll find is in some organisations there is a process for handling these things, and simply from the perspective of the implementer who implements hotlines, my suggestion would be call your hotline first, or your speak up line, because what you'll find is that they have a process for handling those things. So they will still get you your wider discussion, but it will be controlled, and so that the exposure and the risk management to the organisation will be a little bit more practical, because there will be situations where you have e-disclosure, litigation risk management, all of those things. So there is a balance to be struck. But again, here I think the code of ethics is really vital, because your code will give you that framework, that structure to say, these are the kinds of things you need to think about. If there is evidence, highlight it, identify it, hold it, because that's where your speaking up will become relevant.
One of the things that came up in the survey, in the CGMA survey, was that securities of information followed by bribery are actually the greatest issues of concern across all markets for companies. And Brian, I just wondered, do you believe enough is being done at board level to mitigate risk?
I mean, in this context, you know, the area that we're on now, I think, you know, the working accountant has got difficulties because he's governed, or she's governed, by confidentiality, and it's one of the guiding principles of the profession. And when it comes to, you know, reporting issues, be they illegal issues or even ethical issues in some cases, there is an inherent reluctance to take it to its extreme. So in terms of hotlines and so on and so forth, I think they're fine as far as they go, but how effective they are in taking issues that belong outside an organisation to go outside the organisation, I'm not convinced. I think they tend to help handle the issue within an organisation. It might be handled in a very quiet way, in a way that does... I'm not sure that the public interest is always best served by solving the company's problems as opposed to addressing the broader issues that the problem may have for society as a whole. So, so sure, boards and certainly large company boards set up these types of mechanisms. Sometimes they report through to the audit committee, sometimes to the senior independent director. But as I say, I think there is a tendency with all of these structures to have problems handled internally. And when you come to illegal acts, which is something that we're going to produce on hopefully over the next few months, I think that the issue of confidentiality has to be addressed. Because some of these problems, more recent problems that are well recognised in the press and so on, deserve to be taken public and have the law deal with them as opposed to a corporate motive. As far as company boards go, and you know, do they manage risk and so on? You know, there is no question that risk management is a major issue on every board's agenda. Now, can I make one point on the pressures facing accountants? I think it's a very important issue that came up in this segment, probably the most important issue. That where the rubber hits the road with finance people working in companies is on the production of results for the use of owners of all kinds, and in supporting decisions being made by management. And the pressures that accounting functions and finance functions, not just accounting, the overall finance function, is under terms either of economic decline, such as now, or even when it's booming, in terms of delivering the results that their bosses want, is an issue that comes in very subtle ways in terms of the pressure. I was interested that the report said that people felt under more pressure from their team members, but it's no surprise, anybody that's worked in industry knows that the finance guy within the structure, first of all, is a member of a team. Second of all, has to demonstrate what he's done for the organisation or she's done for the organisation. Now, it would be very difficult to say, what I've done for the organisation is I've whistle-blown on this, I've done this. That isn't what people want to... So the salesman can say, I've gone out and I've sold. The production guy can say, I've met the production requirement and so on. The HR guy can say, I've hired this. The pressure comes on the finance guy, what have you done for us? And it is a pressure. And what is often expected, unfortunately, is that if you're 15 cents short on the quarterly earnings forecast, you'll find it. And it's pressure. And it's unfortunate pressure. And there has to be a culture that says, this is unacceptable.
And that's where the support becomes so important up the line. With the increase in finance business partnering and finance professionals working deeper in the business alongside their production colleagues or sales or marketing colleagues, they need to be able to have that assurance that when they challenge and question for the next quarter, that they've got that backup from the finance line. This is absolutely. And there are increasing examples of, it's not quite incentivization, but for you to be recognised as doing a good job because you have ensured that you have met your compliance requirements, or you've come up with the right alternatives, because the worst thing is just to be that finance person going, no, 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 these are the rules, you know, this is statute number 23. It's like, okay, well, that's not going to work like that. Let's think of another solution that works well for the organisation and works well for you.
Can I just make one point on incentivizing? I find it bizarre to be talking about incentivization for ethical. To me, it's kind of, it's an oxymoron. Incentivize ethics. You know, I think most people recognise that one of the causes, maybe the fundamental cause of many of the ethical and other issues that we've had in recent years, is the compensation arrangements for management that includes in the team the financial management. And you have to say to yourself, does it make sense that the finance people are normally at senior management level part of the same group bonus schemes, LTIP schemes and so on and so forth that their peers have? So then to come along and say, well, we'll apply a system that, you know, has demonstrated itself to be kind of flawed in some ways to the obtaining acceptable ethical behaviour, to me is kind of just, let me say, bizarre.
To kind of really wrap things up, I wanted to ask Colin actually, how have you seen the contribution of ethical corporate conduct in improving a company's performance, and how can this best be tracked by metrics?
Well, thank you for asking me a really hard question.
If it can be.
You know, it's a version of does being ethical pay, and I know the Institute of Business Ethics has done a lot of research on that. I guess it's a lot easier to turn it around, and there's plenty of evidence that behaving unethically certainly costs you a lot. And I think of Satyam in India, the big IT company, and more recently Olympus in Japan. You know, good, straightforward, old-fashioned, fraudulent accounting reporting clearly has cost those companies dear. So there's a good sort of, you better behave well because it will cost you if you don't, and that seems to be a strong argument. But of course, it's not black and white. I think we ought to think much more carefully about the balance sheet, the pros and cons, the costs and benefits of behaving in a particular way.
We now have an overview of how ethics and information related to ethical management are being used around the world, as well as how ethics agenda and corporate responsibility is becoming more important. Yet we also learn that there are pressures both within and outside of the business that can undermine ethical practice, and there is still much more that needs to be done.
The AICPA and CIMA require that their members follow their respective institutes' code of ethics in order not only to ensure that their organisations, but also the public are served with utmost integrity. Through the CGMA website, you can access not only your code of ethics, but also a range of resources and tools, as well as support to ensure that you are acting ethically. Visit www.cgma.org/ethics.